Pink News reports that on the morning of April 12th, the body of Fern Feather, a 29-year-old trans woman, was found dead alongside a road in Morristown, Vermont. She was stabbed to death, and the death has been ruled a homicide. Authorities have arrested 43-year-old Seth Brunel. The Worcester Magazine reported on April 5th that the Kennedy Community Health Center launched its new transgender health team last October. The opening is said to be filling a significant void in central Massachusetts for trans care. Dr. Ann McMahon had been the only primary care provider in the area, leaving many with no choice but to travel to Boston or Springfield. Dr. McMahon has been lobbying for more support for TG patients for 2 years and explains that we can see that when people don't get gender-affirming care, they have worse health outcomes overall. At Trans Truth, we would like to applaud these positive and oh-so-necessary steps. On April 4th, the Texas Tribune reported that Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick wants a Texas version of Florida's recently passed Don't Say Gay bill that intends to provide state-sanctioned vigilantism by encouraging parents to sue educators whose teaching they don't approve of. If that strategy sounds familiar, the Florida law was modeled after the Texas anti-abortion law, which allows for vigilantes to sue anyone who aids and abets an abortion after 6 weeks. Patrick has promised, "I will make this law a top priority in the next session." And NPR reports that there are now a dozen states considering their own version of Florida's Don't Say Gay law. Clearly, this is a coordinated strategy to attack the LGBTQ+ community and perhaps even to roll back hard-won rights of that group. In a rather deranged rant in the Washington Examiner on April 4th, Florida pastor and candidate for Florida's 10th Congressional District, Willie Montague, made several disjointed and awkwardly related scriptural references to President Biden's recent promise to stand by the trans community. Among his citations were Genesis 1:27, quote, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image he created them. Male and female he created them," unquote. His rant gets worse from there, citing, inexplicably, both Old and New Testament condemnations of homosexuality. And finally, the Examiner concludes that biological sex is real. Science and the Bible are in agreement here. We couldn't agree more. But note that science also tells us that sex and gender are two very different things. The Daily Mail reports that religious leaders, including the former Archbishop of Canterbury, have written to the British Prime Minister urging him to include trans people in a ban on conversion therapy. Dr. Rowan Williams is among the signatories on the letter, which states that there is no justification for the so-called conversion therapy exclusion of trans people, adding, "To be trans is to enter a sacred journey of becoming whole. We at Trans Truth stand and applaud for such compassion and understanding from the many religious leaders who signed the letter." Another bright spot of news. The ACLU shared yesterday news that the Transportation Security Administration will be making some changes that will make flying much easier for transgender people. First, they will be replacing the current advanced imaging technology scanners, which require the operator to specify one of two binary choices of gender and which will alarm when it detects a mismatch. Next, the TSA is working with airlines to promote an X-gender marker. Then the TSA will be updating its policies to remove gender considerations when verifying ID at the airport. And finally, TSA PreCheck will be offering an X-gender marker to its trusted traveler and pre-check programs. Welcome news indeed. And finally, Deadline is reporting that Disney has cast trans actor Talisa Garcia in an upcoming Lucasfilm series, Willow. Yes, it's a spin-off of That Willow, the 1980s fantasy classic. In a small part, possibly only appearing in one episode, Garcia will play a queen and mother to Tony Revolori's character. This marks the first time that a known trans actor has been cast in a cis role in a Disney film or series. The castings were made long before Disney belatedly stepped into the fray around Florida's Don't Say Gay bill, which was recently signed into law by Governor DeSantis. We knew that your heart was in the right place, Disney. Thanks for showing the rest of the world. Well, hello, and welcome again to Trans Truth. I am your host, Kelly Nelson. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Jerry Ann is on assignment. And today we're talking about ambassadorship. One of the stated goals for us here at Trans Truth is to provide accurate information in order to promote informed social discourse. That is, informed social discourse. Like us, you've probably noted that there are a lot of uninformed people out there when it comes to the transgender community and our issues. Understand that I do not mean to state this in a derogatory way at all. That ignorance is entirely understandable. After all, the TG community makes up a little less than half of 1% of the population, despite all the panicked rhetoric we're hearing from the so-called conservative politicians. Unfortunately, many people, if not most, tend to fear what they do not understand. As tempting as it is to go off on a full-blown Aunt Kelly rant right here about how the right has seized on that fear and ignorance of late, we've got bigger fish to fry today. Today, fair listeners, I want to talk about what we're calling ambassadorship. Each of us under the transgender umbrella, that is cross-dressers, non-binary, trans, etc., has a role to play as an ambassador from our community to the general public. No, I'm not saying that you are required to act in that role. Many transgender people remain closeted and for reasons that need not be justified to anyone but oneself. And in the case of transitioned trans men and women, there is often a desire to just get on with life. Again, we respect those choices, whatever the reason. But at the same time, we believe that as a community, we are where we are because of the actions of those who went before us. We believe that to honor those hard-won gains, the least we can do is show the world who we are, and that their fear is unfounded and misplaced. No, you don't have to be a sign-carrying activist, but you might easily be the person that might flip the enlightenment switch for the very next person you encounter. And it is easy to do. All you have to do is, as they say, be the change you want to see in the world. Okay, I can hear some of you bitches complaining about me using something so cliche. All right, fair point. But I mean it literally. It can be as simple as a smile to the stranger you've made eye contact with. We all know that wide-eyed look we get when someone clocks us at the grocery store, for example. That look is part of the body's instinctive response to a possible threat. We're not a threat, of course, but we are unusual, to say the least. And there's a fair amount of, social conditioning, not to mention evolution, working against us. So along with the wide eyes will be an increase in heart rate and respiration, and maybe even a death grip on that shopping cart. Don't believe me? Take a look next time. Whatever you do, don't look away. You'll look frightened, defeated, nervous, in a word, guilty. You're not, of course. No, really. I know. For many, those first few times out in public as your true self is terrifying. And I frequently hear such encounters described as getting caught. You weren't caught at anything other than being yourself. And it should go without saying that that is not a thing one should feel guilty about. But it's still tough. So do not look away. Instead, smile and nod or say hi, whatever is appropriate for the moment. Not always, but way more often than not, your response will disarm the other person. You'll see them visibly relax. Now, I'm not a sociologist, but I've witnessed this often enough to know that there's some deep-rooted socializing behavior at work here. Like the men-at-arms of old saluting each other to show that they have no intention to reach for their weapon. That smile, that simple nod we give to a stranger has the same reassuring effect based on centuries of culturization. And by the way, unless you're a trans man, I'm not talking about the man nod. You know what I'm talking about, right? The silent sup. That single brief elevation of the face that Men's Health calls a way of communicating regard, diffusing tension, or simply saying hello without needing to stop and chat. You know, I think we need an episode covering mannerisms for men and women. That should be fun. Anyway, you've been warned. An Amazon woman doing that sup nod is going to seed confusion and maybe even panic. The point I'm trying to make is that you want to act normal in this situation. Like I said, more often than not, you can see the tension leave their face and maybe even get a smile in return. But what if you don't? Sometimes you are going to run into the type that just knows that you're just coming from molesting someone in a ladies' room somewhere. That type requires a lot more work than I am usually willing to put in during a brief encounter, but I still maintain my normal and friendly demeanor. No sense in rising to their hate bait, after all. Now, that said, I must confess that I do just live for the scowlers. Oh yes, your Aunt Kelly has a serious penchant for mischief. Story alert. A few years ago, Jerry Ann and I were getting mani-pedis at a large nail salon. It was early, and there was only one other customer, who, you guessed it, began to regard us with obvious disapproval. I smiled at her, of course, and, of course, she immediately looked away. A few minutes later, she's scowling in my direction again. I crank up my smile a bit more. Same response. Later still, she's positively glowering at us. This time, I smile and wave. This shut her down for good. She looked down and never looked our way again. I win!
Yay!
I made a hater miserable by being friendly to her. This set of tactics I've used many times with virtually the same result. It's especially fun when it's a guy in a bar or restaurant doing the glaring. If I get to the wave, it's almost always interpreted as, "Oh my God, she's coming on to me," with the predictable look of disgust or horror. I've yet to use the air kiss, though. That would just be mean, right? Anyway, I like to think that at least some of those people eventually found the grace to reflect on why they were being so rude to the lady that just smiled pleasantly at them. Okay, we've covered at a distance, so to speak, but what about when our interaction requires at least minimal pro forma conversation? You know, like ordering at a restaurant or checking out at that supermarket where we were so nice to the people we passed in the aisles. Same deal. Just be nice. The basic rules of social decorum still apply, and wonder of wonders, most people will follow them, no matter how much they may be flustered by engaging with us. It's like the social norms bind them to play along, if you will. So make it easy on them, however you can. Say please and thank you, and smile. If you get misgendered, drive-thrus are the worst, am I right? A polite correction is not out of line. Just remember to be nice. If they persist, however, and especially if it's obviously deliberate, all bets are off. Asking to speak to the manager is usually very effective, but every once in a while, the manager is an even bigger douchebag. If they're not, I will politely explain that while I understand the employee's ignorance and confusion, being misgendered is hurtful to me, not to mention just plain rude. Sometimes diplomacy means appealing to those with the power to effect change. A good ambassador knows when and how to do that. By the way, if you're dealing with a national chain, a diplomatically worded letter or email to someone at corporate can yield surprisingly good results, unless you're shopping at Hobby Lobby or Chick-fil-A. And if you are,
Oh my God!
we need to have a talk, sweetie. I haven't counted how many times I've said be nice or something like it in the last few minutes, but it's enough to make me think of Patrick Swayze's character Dalton in Roadhouse, lecturing to his crew of bouncers.
I want you to be nice.
Sorry for the distraction. Take all the time you need with that hunk image I just conjured up for you. Now, as I was saying, as ambassadors, we have to be nice. Well, as nice as possible, always. Like it or not, we represent.
Okay.
So what more can we do as ambassadors for our community? Nope, still not talking about activism yet. My co-host, Jerry Ann, has a thing she calls pie diplomacy. She's an incredible cook and baker, you see. For almost as long as I've known her, she makes it a point to ask people who've treated her nicely what is their favorite kind of pie.